Access to cultural events is vital. If we can only have online events whilst we have to live with COVID, then at least we have something. There are some very good quality events happening online, which is encouraging.
Digital events have been a godsend to those of us who have older family members who may be vulnerable or who need to avoid extra crowds. I love online events, so thank you for them.
Virtual events are no replacement at all for the real live experience. I have tried a handful and they just aren't for me.
I have watched online work, but I am a bit fatigued by digital at the moment.
I have lost my income due to COVID and therefore this has affected my responses. I don't have the funds for much.
Can't wait for a full return to live entertainment.
Bring back live events.
We are looking forward to live entertainment again, but not enough to take what we consider to be risks to our health to join in. We have very much enjoyed live stream media.
As much as I love live events, I will not book anything until safe COVID secure operations are proven.
Feel so desperately sorry for venues and people working in them and freelancers at this time. Concerned that many events and festivals rescheduled for 2021 won't happen.
Wishing you much luck. I miss the theatre and all it stands for. There is so much joy and also business which surrounds the area that will suffer.
COVID testing is not reliable enough to use like this. The more people who are tested, the more false positives there will be, and people with early infection aren't always detected.
1 meter is not sufficient. A negative test doesn't mean you don't have COVID. Hence the need for a 14-day isolation period.
COVID testing on arrival is pointless unless it gives an immediate result.
Although I would be reasonably confident that venues would take all necessary steps, I would remain concerned about compliance of some attendees.
Ensuring that people are following the rules in the venue.
Going to the theatre is about the entire experience, not just about watching the performance.
Attending needs to be a pleasurable experience. Social distancing is not pleasurable.
I would like to have the right to a refund if I arrive at a venue and feel uncomfortable with the measures I see in place and wish to leave.
Seats 2 meters apart would be essential.
Family groups should be able to sit together. It should be clear, on booking, how the seat allocation system works.
Being in the category of vulnerability, it would take a great deal for me to feel really comfortable attending. The thought of public transport is still daunting.
I can't take any chances of catching COVID as I am caring for a frail elderly relative who is shielding. You should get on with it. I am ready to attend.
I need live music. Live stream is okay, but it doesn't fill my soul.
I don't understand why some theaters opened and others didn't. It works so well in those that are open.
As long as risk assessed and safe, the sooner the better.
I felt comfy at the event I attended, because there was a small audience and there was strict social distancing.
I would only attend at times where the local rate is very low.
I am only attending outdoor events at present.
I think we must support these experiences at this time, or there won't be any left to go to when this is finally over.
I am so thankful to the theatres, cinemas, and museums for working out ways for us to attend again, as there is nothing I like more.
Hello everyone, I'm Katie Rains from Indigo, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the first Culture Restart webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today and being prepared to give another hour of your time to the dreaded Zoom. Particularly those of you who've had challenging news today about whichever tier you're in, so I appreciate that you might be feeling a bit low. But I hope you'll find the next hour worthwhile, and most importantly, it will give you some ideas to feel equipped to meet the challenges that we're all facing. Few housekeeping bits first. If you're on YouTube, if you're on the YouTube site itself, you'll see a live chat panel where you can submit questions or comments at any time. So please do so during the presentation and don't wait until the end. If you're using Eventbrite, if this is embedded into Eventbrite, you're clicking this title up at the top of the video player will take you through to YouTube instead, and you'll be able to use the chat function there. The format of today is that we're going to give you a little bit of background, share the findings and our top takeaways, and then have some questions at the end. We'll try and keep it pacey, so keep your questions coming in as we go, and we'll get on to those a bit later. So today, I am going to be joined by my two new colleagues at the Insights Alliance, David Rees, Deputy CEO of Baker Richards, and Chris Unit, founder of One Further. So you'll all be relieved to know that it won't just be my voice that you're hearing, and I'm not in charge of the tech, which I always mess up. So, okay, what is Culture Restart and where did it come from? As many of you will be aware, when COVID hit, there was a real need to understand what audiences were thinking, so that the hundreds of organisations whose worlds have been turned upside down could factor in audience sentiment when they're making decisions. So we ran 2 surveys early on, after the interval in April and May, swiftly followed by Act 2 in June and July. And this research gave organisations and the sector as a whole an understanding of what was important to our audiences in terms of missing events, returning to in-person experiences, and consuming culture digitally. With such a large data set, we quickly realised that other voices in the industry may have interesting perspectives on what it might be telling us, and that organisations might be looking for answers to very specific questions, all hidden there in the data. So I was delighted when 2 leading cultural consultancies stepped up to help with that task. Chris and his team at One Further built, at some speed, an amazing dashboard that allowed cultural organisations to filter the survey data by age, type of organisation, frequency of attender, and region. And I know that's been used very extensively. And they're hoping to have one built for this survey data very shortly. And David and the Baker Richards team did some deep dive analysis of the issues around pricing, and in particular, the pricing of digital content. So when it was clear to us that we were all going to be in this for a lot longer than we first thought, we decided to team up to form the Insights Alliance and use our collective brains and efforts to deliver the research the sector needs about its audiences. So the Culture Restart Tracker, the Culture Restart Toolkit that we've developed, is designed to help organisations who aren't yet open, or who have been open and now closed again, or are only partially open. And that's what this tracker survey that we're reporting on today does. But also we have a set of tools for organisations who are or will be soon opening again. We have some pre and post visit tools, experience surveys that some organisations have been using, and we'll report on the outcomes from those in the new year. So the tracker that we're reporting on today is the one that's aimed at organisations who are open or have who are not open, or only partially open, or recently closed again. So our commitments as research agencies, we have no agenda beyond wanting to see the arts, heritage and cultural sectors succeed, and to see audiences back for the benefit of all. We're aware that at times we're going to show data that's good to hear, but sometimes it might be tempting to shoot the messenger. But we're going to share what audiences are actually saying impartially and transparently, and not put a gloss on it and only tell you things you want to hear. We'll be open and clear where there are any caveats in the data. We know too often organisations opt in to be part of research projects and then wait weeks or months for the findings, which in a global pandemic isn't really much use. So we've devised a way of ensuring that all participating organisations can access their own findings in real time, so that there's no lag in their results. We're being very open. Up till now, some parts of the sector have had access to more detailed information about what audiences are thinking than others. But in the phrase of the moment, we think that a level playing field is what's important. So we'll be publishing monthly snapshots of the results openly, so that everyone can see what audiences are saying. And finally, this is the first wave in a new sentiment tracker. And a tracker by its nature is designed to track what will hopefully be shifts in attitudes and behaviours over time. No one snapshot will ever tell the full picture, but we will report significant shifts as rapidly as we can. And so this tracker is going to run until April next year, and you can join it at any point. So to take us through today's results, I'm going to hand over to David of Baker Richards, and he will walk us through the top level findings of this first phase of the tracker. Thank you, David.
Great, thanks, Katie. Hello, everyone. Yes, so I'm going to take you through the so half of the headline findings. Actually, I'm going to talk to you about how audiences have been and are currently engaging with culture and how they're feeling about returning to live events. And then I'm going to hand over to Chris from One Further to take you through the findings in relation to digital. So here's just a quick overview of the survey, and I think it's just important to note that these responses are from October, which is obviously pre-vaccine news, and it wasn't until the very end of October that lockdown 2 was announced. So as Katie mentioned, this work is part of an ongoing tracker, and we've been collecting responses throughout November, which we'll be able to report on and compare changes at a later date. And actually, I checked as of this morning, we have a further 7,500 responses from November. So that should mean we'll be able to start cutting the data by key events like the pre and post-COVID vaccine news, the Christmas announcements, the new tier announcements from today. I should say, though, in a few instances, when we're looking at this data today, there are some comparisons that we're able to make with the after the interval Act 2 responses, which were from June and July this year. So we can see how sentiment has changed kind of between those months. Just to give you a quick overview of the respondents in this first wave from October. So those nearly 5,000 responses were from predominantly kind of older age groups. So only 14% were under 45, 33% were over 65, the rest were kind of in between. One of the key things is that to bear in mind is that the majority, nearly all of them, were kind of outside of London. Obviously, eventually we aim to have a breakdown by region, and we're slowly kind of building a picture of what it might look like on a regional level. And especially if you're from a London venue and you haven't signed up yet, then you obviously you know what to do, and we'll give you more info at the end of this session today. And then just to kind of a few other kind of key things that respondents were reporting: 20% have lost income since the pandemic, and 27% are classed as vulnerable, which should give us enough responses at some point to then break it down by those two particular kind of groups. So I want to start with a kind of picture of what their attendance pre-COVID is. Again, just useful to give you some context as to who these respondents are. So as I said, that they're quite frequent respondents. You can see here we asked people how often they had attended or visited cultural experiences before coronavirus, and 72% of them said that they were attending or visiting 4 or more times a year pre-COVID. So they are amongst the most frequent attenders. We did then ask them how comfortable returning to cultural experiences again, how often they would do that when they were kind of able to return. So 75% said about the same, 12% said more than before. So in total, that's 87% saying that they either maintain or increase their pre-COVID levels of attendance. And only 13% intend to attend less often. We also wanted to know how much they were thinking of spending when they were able to return. And again, the vast majority of them were saying about the same. So 78% there in the middle said about the same as before. But 14%, amazingly, said that they would be looking to spend more in future. So that's a total of 92% of respondents who are thinking that they will be spending more or the same on cultural events in future. And then the remaining 8% who think they will spend less. Just to understand what their kind of key art form preference was, we asked them what was their most frequent attendance kind of pre-COVID. and there's a breakdown here. So you can see that the most common choices were musical theatre, music, rock and pop, in particular, cinema and film, and then starts to get into kind of lower proportions of people picking some of those other things, like certainly outdoor arts is a kind of tiny proportion, and contemporary dance, opera and ballet at the bottom there. So that just gives you an idea of what their kind of most commonly preferred art form was. And just to say on this slide before I move on, you'll see it. We'll kind of show you this one again later on, and compare that to what they have been attending since lockdown and what they have booked for going forwards. So just a quick summary of that section. We saw that 87% intend to attend about the same or more often than pre-COVID, and 92% of them intend to spend about the same or more in future. So there's positives in that. So if we just now look at their attendance since COVID-19, we asked them if they had attended in person, this is, any cultural events, activities, or venues since some of them had begun to reopen across the summer. So 25%, so I'm combining the two darker, the dark blue and the light blue parts of the chart there, they had attended a cultural event since reopening. So that's 14% who said yes, they've attended more than once, compared to only 11% who said that they had attended only once. And we have shown the breakdown here by age cohort. So we've got an increase in the proportion of people who have attended amongst younger kind of audiences. So under 45s, we've got 19% who have been more than once, 14% who have been once, compared to the over 65s, where the proportions are smaller. Which I think obviously gives you some indication of who it is that is more likely to have returned. So as I said, we showed this chart earlier, which was the pink column showing you how what their most preferred kind of art form was pre-COVID. But then we asked people what they have attended since venues began to reopen, since organizations began to reopen. And then we'll show this in the blue. So you can see there's a kind of disparity between what their most frequent attendance was and what they have been doing since reopening. Now, obviously, that's a kind of a matter of what has been available since the kind of reopening and since summer. But in particular, we're looking at cinema and film, visual arts, outdoor arts, heritage sites. Which, yes, I think is clearly a reflection of what was possible to do over the summer. If they weren't attending any events, we wanted to know why, as I'm sure you do as well. So we asked them, and 57% of people said that they were actually just trying to avoid. So there was a reluctance there. They were trying to avoid interacting with crowds of people. And that was then followed by 41% who said that there were not enough opportunities on offer. So it's not just a case of availability. There is also a reluctance amongst audiences to return to live events. But if we go back to those people who had attended, we asked them how confident they feel about attending cultural events again in future. And the good news here is that there's a kind of plus 47% confidence score. So the chart here, it's showing you kind of the responses broken down from not at all confident over on the left-hand part of the chart over to very confident on the right-hand chart. And you can see none of those bars are crossing over into not at all confident area of the chart. They're all in the veering towards the very confident side of the chart on the right. And you can see, again, we've given you a breakdown by age here, so that younger audiences tend to be feeling more confident about returning again once they have already experienced kind of attending since lockdown, certainly compared to the over 65s. So a small proportion, quarter of people, have attended a cultural event since reopening. But the good news is that those that have, they are indicating a plus 46% confidence score. If we look then towards the future, so what have they been booking for? We asked people if they'd booked any events since venues had closed in March that they haven't yet attended. So a total of 31% of respondents said that they had booked something that they had not yet attended. Again, majority of them have booked for multiple events. I guess it's just a reflection of their overall kind of frequency as an audience, kind of within the kind of respondent profile, and 14% had only booked for one event. We asked them when their first event or visit that they had booked for was scheduled to take place. And here we've got a comparison with after the interval Act 2 from June, July this year, where we also asked respondents the same question. So back in June, July, very few people had booked something that was going to take place within the next month. So August. So that's the dark blue at the bottom. But you can see that in October, that dark blue, so that within the next month, so November, obviously this was the pre-lockdown announcement when you could have actually gone to an event. 28% of people had booked, who had booked for something that was going to take place within the next month. But I guess it's kind of also interesting to note that there's over 50% of people who had booked something that was more than 3 months away, and that's similar in both June and July and in October. We then also asked them what they had booked for, and again, I'm bringing this breakdown of art forms in here so that you've got the two previous, what's their most frequent attendance at, what they've been to since lockdown, and now if I bring in the dark blue bar, you can see what they have actually booked since lockdown, which kind of goes back somewhat more representative of what their most frequent attendance was, although particularly music, rock and pop, and comedy, which again, I guess is about availability. But things like outdoor art, even heritage sites have dropped off considerably since what people have been to since lockdown. In terms of things that might make people more likely to book now for events in the future, we gave people a range of options and asked them if they would help them buy a ticket now. And again, we've got a comparison from the Act 2 in June, July, and the latest Culture Restart from October. So it's similar across both data sets here. The kind of the thing that would reassure people the most is that their ability to return tickets for a refund if they were unwell or unable to attend. That's nearly 2/3 in both cases. And then just under a half are saying if they could exchange the tickets if they're unwell or unable to attend as well. So obviously that's really important in terms of the messaging and what audiences are looking for, to just encourage them to book, that they have some assurance that they're not going to lose out if they're not able to attend. So we saw that 31% of the respondents have booked events since March that they haven't yet attended. And then that last chart there showing you that 61% of respondents would be more likely to book for future events if they had the ability to return the tickets if they were unable to attend. So if we move on now to attitudes to attending cultural events again, we wanted to know when people thought they might be ready to start booking again. So how long away do you think they are before they start kind of buying tickets again? Only 12% said that they would be ready to start booking within the next month. Now, again, just to reiterate that this was the pre-lockdown announcement, so they obviously had assumed that they would be able to book in November. But 39% of the respondents said that they just weren't sure when. I mean, there's a small proportion also saying not planning to book at all. So I guess over 40% of people just aren't sure. And then there's quite a lot of people who are, waiting, 20% waiting 3 to 6 months, and 13 more than 6 months. To kind of get a little bit more detail and kind of how people are feeling about returning to live events, we've got another comparison here with June and July about how audiences are feeling. Just to note that there is an additional option in October in the light blue there, but just so starting at the top of this chart in the purple, that is the proportion of people who said that they cannot envisage attending a cultural event at a venue until a vaccine, treatment, or rapid test for COVID is readily available. And you can see that kind of purple proportion has increased. The people who are saying that has increased from 14% in June, July to 21% in October. And again, just remember, this is before the vaccine announcements. And that's kind of increased at the expense of those who said that they would prefer to wait until they can attend a cultural event in the usual way again, which is the lighter purple on that chart, which has fallen from 19% to 12%. And those who would consider attending if they felt confident the required safety measures were in place has also fallen from 51% to 43%. And still, there are 16% of people in both June, July, and October who are happy to return as soon as possible. And then the extra option there only accounts for 8%, and that's people who would prefer to wait until venues have been open for a few months. We also asked people how they felt about about venues and organizations putting the kind of appropriate measures in place. Again, this is similar to that confidence chart that I showed to you earlier, where the left-hand side of the chart is the kind of negative confidence compared to the right-hand side, which is the kind of positive confidence. So they're feeling quite positive about venues and organizations keeping audiences informed about what to expect. They're certainly more confident about that than some of the other things. But again, they're all positive. 57% think that they're confident that they'll keep performers and artists and staff safe, and then just under 50% for keeping audiences safe and enforcing the social distancing and safety measures. And then we've got a kind of a more detailed look at how audiences might feel about some specific safety measures, from whether or not it would be essential, and they'll be in dark blue, if they're okay with it in the kind of light blue, or if they would feel uncomfortable with it in a kind of red color here. So I'll just go through them one by one. So starting at the bottom with seating guaranteed at least 1 meter apart. 48% of respondents said that would be essential. Only a very small proportion said that they would feel uncomfortable about this. Insisting all audiences wear face coverings throughout the venue. Again, 35%, so it's a kind of essential or okay with. 16% would feel uncomfortable, so they're in a kind of minority. Temperature screening on arrival, it's not necessarily essential. 26% said that it was. Most people said that they're okay with it, and no one particularly feels uncomfortable about it. Likewise, COVID testing on arrival, although there's slightly higher proportion of people who would feel uncomfortable about that at 22%. And then this final measure, we asked about kind of really in relation to the government's Operation Moonshot, where COVID testing might allow theatres to kind of operate as normal. So we wanted to find out how audiences were feeling if the venues or organizations were to say no face coverings, seating could be operated as normal, and we'll just test you for COVID on arrival. And 72% of the respondents said that they would feel uncomfortable about this. So obviously it is going to take a lot more work to make audiences feel comfortable about that. It's also worth noting that, or kind of remembering as well, that this is outside of this is outside of London, but clearly that's something that I guess we'll need some more kind of work with to kind of, if that's going to be an option going forwards. So I think what we're finding here is that there's certainly a reluctance amongst respondents to start booking again. Only 12% are ready to start booking again within the next month. 39% just not sure. And that they certainly do feel uncomfortable about the idea of not having any face coverings and no social distancing at all. So I'm going to hand over to Chris now to take you through the digital findings.
Thanks very much for that. Hi, everybody. Okay, so the survey asks all sorts of questions about people's attitudes towards engaging with digital content and digital activities. So here are the kinds of things that have come back from that. So one of the first questions that we ask is if anyone has engaged with culture online before or since cultural venues closed. We've found that from the respondents, a large proportion of them, well, as 56% of people have done since venues closed in March. And of those, over half of those have only done it since the first lockdown. So I think what we can take from this is that it's a new experience for quite a lot of people. To some extent, the norms and expectations of what can be experienced and how that will be provided by organizations are still being set to some extent. So moving on to the next one, we've got we've also asked people how many times they've engaged with these experiences. And what we found is that people are engaging quite frequently. We've got 48% of people who have engaged with online events and experiences, 48%. So that's quite a large number of people engaging very regularly with this, which, I mean, the good news from that is that it tells us that people aren't being put off by previous experiences. So that's good news. We've broken down the age ranges here as well, because I think what this reveals quite interestingly is that it's not just young people who are engaging frequently with digital content and activity. It's that 65 plus age range that's the most frequently engaging. This might upend some expectations that some people have around this stuff. But if we're thinking about how digital breaks down barriers to engagement, then older age groups and also vulnerable individuals tend to have the most to gain. We've asked what kinds of activities people have engaged with. This, to some extent, is going to be descriptive of the supply that's been available. So archive recordings made pre-closure at the top there, along with events created specifically for online, of which there's been a huge volume over the last little while, down to the interactive events and creative workshops, which tend to be much more high touch and perhaps not as easy to produce quickly. But if we compare that to how likely people are to have paid for those things, then what we can see there is that it's the archive recordings that has the biggest disparity there. Whereas creative workshops, interactive events, people are much more likely to have handed over some cash for that stuff. Again, this is going to be descriptive to some extent. We look at the virtual guided tours. It's only reasonably recently that organizations have started to charge for some of those kinds of things. There's some interesting things to take from that. Just wrapping up that. So 56% of respondents have engaged with culture, and 48% have done so multiple times, 4+ times. And in terms of the type of experiences, the archive recordings, online specific events are most common there, but not necessarily the most frequently paid for. So we're all dying to know about whether this is just a flash in the pan or it's a fad, or if people are actually interested in considering this as a way to access digital culture in the future. So we asked some questions around that, and what's come back from that is that it seems quite clear that there will remain an interest in engaging with this kind of digital activity in the future. We've got 41% of people who are interested or very interested in engaging with it, and another chunk on top of that who are at least they're neutral to the idea. So we'd say they are they're up for grabs, which gives us a potential market of 69% of cultural attenders who are interested ongoing. Later on, we've got a comparison with how this measure that once live performances are back. And it was really interesting to see what people would expect around payment for those. So of the people who have expressed an interest in digital activity, only 12% of those would expect it to be free. The others there's a large percentage of people who would expect it to be to pay the same as live or less than a live experience. We've also broken this down across the different types of digital activity, and there's quite a lot of data on this one, so I would recommend downloading the report so that you can have a look at this in a bit more detail. But there's a few things that we can take from this, and I think the first thing is this clear difference in value perception between something that is interactive or a live or moderated experience, like the interactive events and the creative workshops, versus at the other end, archive recordings and the virtual guided tours. Worth bearing in mind at this point, your specific audience may vary. We're looking at quite a large cohort here. So your specific audience might vary to some extent within that, but I think we can take away some things from the contrasts here. So a virtual tour might not be as valuable, well, might be more valuable if it was presented as some kind of live experience. And archive performances, depending on how they're presented, might make more sense to wrap into some kind of live stream or online specific event to give it that extra perception of value. We asked people how likely they would be to buy certain things, and so good news here is that very few people describe themselves as unlikely to buy a ticket for an online event. We asked about people's propensity to pay for a monthly subscription for online events, which you can look at this either way, I guess. I mean, there's much fewer people there, but actually there is a reasonable number of people there who would be interested in something like that. And it's interesting now to see other organizations experimenting with different models, which are kind of a hybrid between ticketed and subscriptions by buying a number of passes to events. So Petworth Festival in October ran on that kind of basis. So it wasn't quite a subscription. You gave people some flexibility in what they could access over time. So on a previous slide, we showed that there were 69% of people would potentially be interested in engaging with digital activities ongoing. We also asked specifically about whether what their attitudes would be once they were able to attend a variety of live performances in person. From this, we got so 23% of respondents would continue to pay for digital events in the future, no matter what. So that's encouraging if you're planning to offer more of that kind of thing and not let the skills that you built up over the past few months go to waste. And a whopping great 61% of people said they're less likely to engage, but would still consider it for events they might not be able to see otherwise. And I think this speaks to the ability of this kind of digitally delivered activity to break down those barriers of geography, time, convenience, access, and so on. So there is still quite a large opportunity there. So just to sum up the last few slides, in terms of digital tickets, 62% of respondents would be willing to pay for digital events. And that skews more towards the interactive and moderated kind of experiences and the live stream. And if we're looking into the future, then 23% of people would definitely be interested in continuing to engage in this kind of way. And there is that 61% chunk who would be interested for events that they would not otherwise be able to see live. So I'm going to hand back to, I think Katie's going to pick up from here.
I think we're all coming in now. So what we thought we'd do now, we'll be pasting in the chat a link to be able to download these slides if anybody wants them as well. But we thought we'd just each of us give you 3 takeaways from what we've seen so far in this data. So for me, as we found in After the Interval, audiences say that they're keen to return, and actually they say that in pretty similar proportions to the way that they've said it right since the start of the pandemic. That where audiences have returned, they feel very confident and safe with what you're doing, with the measures that you've put in place. So actually the act of attending is building that confidence. And then my 3rd takeaway is that we need to keep understanding what audiences are telling us, what audiences are saying, and not just doing what the government says is allowed. So Operation Moonshot is a great example of that. That was what they were pushing to say, this is how theatres are going to reopen. But it's very clear that customers do not want that. So that's why it's really important for us to keep our ear to what audiences are saying and what's important to them. Chris.
So my top 3 takeaways from what we've seen here is that there is likely to be a strong ongoing appetite for digital content, and I think that's healthy for people's planning in the short term while we dodge between different tiers and opening and closing, that there can be some continuity with the offer that organizations can put together. Looking at the how people place value on different types of online activity, I think it's important to get a balance between across the programs of activity that venues are putting out, in the way that arts venues are used to providing balanced programs across art forms and experiences in real life on their stages. I think that needs to come into the digital activity as well, and think about what a coherent offer would be in that kind of context. And I think it's really important to realize that this online culture stuff isn't just for younger people. It's not a route for developing your audience into a younger one necessarily at all. And it's older people, vulnerable groups who are engaging in large numbers at the moment and can have a lot to gain from some of these barriers being to attendance being pulled down.
And then for me, I just wanted to talk about what kind of paying for digital was kind of some of the takeaways that were coming out for me. So as we saw, most people who are interested in digital are also willing to pay for it, especially if that digital, as Chris was saying, offers something unique like an interactive event or online specific event. We also saw that there's a range of what people are willing to pay. So we saw in one of those charts that there were a small proportion of people who were willing to pay as much as live, but equally there was more people who are willing to pay something. And that's why I think one of the things that's key for me is that those principles of price differentiation that are often used for live events also can be applied to the digital content as well. And then finally, it's just something we've written about several times in the past, but it's just free as a bad anchor, by which I mean that an anchor is a kind of consumer psychology term, which refers to the first price you encounter setting the context for how you interpret other prices. So free really is setting a kind of dangerous precedent. It can undermine the value by encouraging that kind of thoughtless consumption, and ultimately it's then going to impact on the potential for future income generation. And I know that we've seen recently more organizations are kind of slowly moving towards monetizing their digital offers, and obviously it's very much still in its infancy as to what works and what doesn't, which I guess is why it's really important to be flexible and adapt quickly to the market so you don't miss out on that opportunity to kind of maximize your income going forwards. So I'll hand back over to Katie.
Thank you. So before we get on to Q&As, if you haven't been part of this so far, as I said earlier, we're carrying on with this until April. So please do sign up if you'd like to be part of it. Flo's going to put a link in the chat to do that, or you can go to the Indigo website. We'd really like as wide a range of organisations to be involved as possible across the whole country, because as we've done with the after the interval and the Act 2 data, once we've got more data in there, we can start cutting it in different ways. So more data means more insights. It means we can segment by things like frequency of attendance. We can look at how people who attended infrequently before COVID compare with those who attended more frequently. We were able to look at disabled audiences versus non-disabled audiences. We were able to look at differences between art forms, and probably most importantly now by region, and how that plays out. So the more organisations we've got in there, the more we're able to do it. We've also designed the questions to work for a range of cultural organisations. So we're particularly interested if you're from a museum, gallery or visitor attraction. We'd also love to have you involved. The previous studies were very much aimed at venues and theatres and performing arts organisations, but we're working with the Museums and Cultural Property team, Arts Council England, to try and make sure that we get plenty of museums and visual arts organisations in as well. And if you're not from an organisation and you work for a support organisation, please do help us spread the word to get as many organisations involved as possible. It's free to join to any participating organisation, and as we said earlier, we make all the results freely available. So we have the next slide. Okay. You can download this report, these slides, from either the Indigo website or the Baker Richards website. And we will be back with more reports and more webinars as new findings emerge, both from this tracker survey and also our experience surveys, which are the ones that are being used by venues who have been opening. And in the new year, we'll also be working with the Audience Agency for their perspectives on how this survey data is reflected in the audience spectrum segments. Okay, so thank you for people who've been putting comments in and sending across questions. I'm now going to hand over to Robin Cantrell-Fenwick, CEO of Baker Richards, who is going to handle the Q&A. Hello, Robin.
Hi, Katie. Thank you very much. In a pre-pandemic world, my job would be to run around the audience with a microphone, but instead we've got these questions here. So huge thank you to everyone who's been sending questions in. Just a reminder, if you can't see this panel on the right-hand side, the chat panel, then you're probably in the embedded player in Eventbrite. And the thing to do if you are in Eventbrite is to click on the title of the video at the top of the screen, that title there, that's circled in red. That will break you out of Eventbrite, and you'll be able to see the Q&A, which includes a link to the report that we've been discussing today. So let me bring in some questions. I think if we start with, I think this question is so apt to today and the news of the tiers that have come out in the UK. What's your point of view on the start-stop model that we've seen so far? Is there a risk that people who are confident in attending and then face a new shutdown lose their confidence? Katie, do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, well, what I've seen in this survey and also in the experience surveys is that where people have attended, their confidence has, with the pre and post, we're asking them how they feel before they come. And it's fair to say they're quite anxious if it's their first attendance since lockdown. But then after they come, after they've been, their confidence level shoots up. So it seems to suggest that the act of actually attending, because you're all dealing with it so well, increases confidence. So I don't think that will make any difference to people who have managed to attend. I think they will still be probably very frustrated, but very confident about attending. I think it does the most damage with the people who haven't yet attended, because it sort of builds up this latent fear that then potentially builds up and up and up. So I think it's really important that our messaging, if you've taken part in the surveys and you've got some quantitative scores that you can put on things. I think I spotted on the Barbican's website that they were putting their scores up about how confident audiences who had been were feeling about having attended. So I think that's what we need to focus on. But I also think the stop-start thing, if your refunds and exchanges policy and practices aren't really slick, getting people their money when you are having to cancel performances, they're going to lose confidence in from a different point of view in terms of getting, booking for something and then it taking them ages to get their money back, or not being quite sure what's going to happen.
Thanks very much, Katie. And we've got this question from Victoria. Is there any intention to explore digital engagement amongst lower frequency in-person attenders who are an audience that are of interest to all of us? David or Chris? David, do you want to?
Yes, sure. So absolutely, yes, in an ideal world, we would be looking at this, and we are starting to get more responses from less frequent attenders coming through. It's just this first kind of wave, the breakdown was kind of driven predominantly by frequent attenders. But with the November data on top of that as well, then we should be able to start getting more data, and more data means more useful insights into kind of those lower frequency attenders.
That's great. Thank you very much. And there's a question here that I think is probably for Chris, but maybe for all of us, because the first part is about surveying in general. Do you think that what people say is the same as what they actually do? And many of the paid live streams are getting online audiences that don't reflect the enthusiasm that's been seen in our results.
Shall I start? So I think the first part of it is to recognise that this is a subset of cultural audiences. And it's cultural audiences, so that's probably where some of the enthusiasm comes from. And so there might be a large swathe of people who are outside the scope of this study who may be not quite so enthusiastic. But on the other hand, this is where we run the risk of straying into anecdote. I've seen data from lots of paid live streams that have done really rather well, and have been small, moderate, and in some cases quite large successes. So I think that's one of the strengths of something like this. We can cut across a larger swathe of organizations where maybe these live streams are more successful than other areas, and try and take the lessons from it.
Great, thank you very much. I think we should clarify this question. We did do so in the chat, but for anyone who hasn't seen the chat, there was a slide which demonstrated what would give audiences confidence to rebook, and the question was the insurance point, the ticket protection product, only asked on the second survey, the Culture Restart survey, because it went from 0 to, I think, 18% from memory. And yes, just to clarify, that option was only in Culture Restart. Another question on the survey itself: do we have any findings around donations? In that I'll pay what you can, in that I often enjoy some online content for free, but would have donated if the option had been there. David, I think that's probably a question for you.
Yeah, so in the survey itself, when we were asking people how much they would be willing to pay for certain digital content, there was an option which was I'd prefer to donate, essentially, or kind of pay what you can, I guess. And I think that kind of overall, that it was a fairly big chunk of people who were kind of willing to do that. They weren't in the majority. More people were willing to just pay. But I think that the danger with, as always, with the kind of the pay what you can donation model, is that you still need to give people a kind of an indication of what you would expect them to pay. So that kind of then sets, as I say, going back to that anchor kind of price point, it sets that expectation of this is what it's worth. So a suggested donation will often then help, increase the likelihood of achieving that donation ask.
Great, thank you very much. And I think also we should cover this question from Hannah, which is in the "Are you ready to book again?" question. Was everyone asked, or was it just the people who had said that they're not yet starting again? So I'll just put that back up on screen if I can. There we go. That was this question here. David, did everybody answer this?
No, it was just the people who haven't already booked. So when you do download the report, in the bottom corner of each of the charts that we are showing, we've got the number of respondents. So if you remember, the overall number of respondents was like 4,900 and something. So in this question, you can see that it's only 3,388, which is the subset of obviously everyone.
Lovely, thank you very much. There is a question, let me take that away for now. There's a question which I'm just searching for, which was around, here we go, factors out of our control. Chris would be interested in future surveys, understanding how much factors out of our control, such as feelings of safety in using public transport. And I should say, we had this slide here just to emphasize that when we were looking at this slide, the factors here on the right-hand side, we think are all largely within a venue's control. I should say these two. And then when it gets into being open for a few months, being able to attend in the usual way, vaccines and so on, obviously these factors here are out of venue's control. We know that after the interval certainly did ask the questions about public transport. We don't think we asked them this time round, but we will take a look at that. So thank you very much.
In Act 2, it was in Act 2, and it was the need to travel on public transport in order to attend an event was the only really significant one that people felt really uncomfortable about. So absolutely is an issue.
And just to say, this time around, we are asking people, so if they haven't attended yet, there is a chart in the report. It was 20% of people said that they were reluctant to travel to cultural events and venues. So that is in the report. It's back up on slide 19 for reference.
Great, thank you, David. This is a good. It's a standard post-show questionnaire that we can be using with digital audiences to contribute to this shared research. Katie, do you want to talk about the pre and post that we have?
Yeah, so this particular bit is about audiences who can't attend at the moment, but the other bits of the toolkit are around audiences who are attending, and we have the pre and post visit surveys. So we're currently looking at how we could adapt those to be used for digital experiences as well. At the moment, they're based on an in-person experience, but that's something that is quite easy to adapt. So we're looking at doing that now. So they should be ready shortly.
And Chris, is there anything that you'd like to say about tracking digital analytics more broadly for online events?
Yes, there is. So we are finding we're getting more people getting in touch because they can't see people walking into their venues anymore. So it's just become more important to understand the stats that are coming through their websites. We're finding that it's easier when people are embedding players on their own websites to get richer data on how people are behaving. If you're using third-party platforms, then you've got less of a view into that. In many cases, so I think that becomes part of the decision-making process when you're deciding where to put these things out. Just how well do you want to know your audience? Can you pop up website surveys at the end of a performance to see how people reacted to them?
Great, thank you very much, Chris. Sam asks, which sectors of the industry are likely to get the biggest shock from our findings? And shock's maybe not the word we would use, but I think the finding around Operation Moonshot really stands out for me. Right at this moment in time, when we surveyed audiences, were not on board with the idea that rapid testing on arrival would then negate the need for social distancing inside the venue and for mask wearing specifically. So that really stands out for me. And also, I think we've seen in the data that there's an increase in people who are kind of waiting for that vaccination to come along. But of course, we've had really positive news on that front. Does anyone want to add anything on that? Sorry, I answered a question as well as asking it.
I think it remains to be seen whether they will have the same skepticism about the vaccine. I saw a question in there about, festivals. Will we see, once there's a vaccine, will people just come flooding back? I suspect the young people will come back first, and therefore festivals are probably going to be in a better position than indoor venues, I'm guessing. But I suspect there'll be a lot of people in that older age bracket that will wait and see, that will want to see venues open, be reassured that they're safe, and then come back. So, I mean, I'm not sure whether it will be in that horrible situation. You know, we're all redoing seating plans at the moment with bubbles and all kinds. You know, we might be in a position where certain areas of the theatre are socially distanced and certain areas aren't. Maybe nightmare. Anyway, we'll see.
Thank you very much, Katie. I'll throw this open to any of you who would like to answer whether audiences still fit into existing segmentation models, or have you noticed any changes? And I guess this is a question about how people are behaving atypically during the pandemic, but also about when people either look to return or don't. Are our existing segmentation models fit for purpose?
Well, we looked at our after the interval and Act 2 data through our segmentation model, which is called Total Audience, which basically splits people into 5 segments based on the sort of things they attend: classical work or classic work, contemporary work, mainstream work, and family work. And then the 5th segment is the people who do cross over between any of those. And typically, for an arts organisation, about 80% of the audience doesn't cross over. Even the people that are coming fairly frequently would tend to stick to one type of work, not art form, but sort of type of work. So you tend to find that the sort of more traditional audiences fall into that classic bubble, and they would, you know, come to maybe Shakespeare and classical music and opera and that kind of stuff. And the contemporary audiences would attend a range of art forms in that contemporary bubble. And what we've seen so far is that they are absolutely behaving in the way that we would expect them to, in that the contemporary audiences are looking for new experiences from their digital experiences. They don't just want a kind of a poor version of what they could see on a stage, just filmed and stuck online. Whereas actually the traditional audiences are looking for something that's as close as possible to the live experience. They want it to, you know, to even some of the orchestral concerts, you know, if they don't show the orchestra tuning up, it doesn't quite feel right for them. And family audiences are looking for much more participatory and interactive experiences. And I think it also maps onto, you know, when audiences will come back. I think the contemporary audiences will probably be the first back. The more conservative classic audiences will probably wait and see. I think the most difficult audience segment to work out how we're going to get this right for are the mainstream segments. So the people that come to the sort of rock and pop and comedy, because their motivation to come is generally a social one rather than an artistic one. They're coming with family and friends. They're coming for a good night out. They want it to be part of having a drink and a dinner and whatever else. It's, you know, the entertainment is just the vehicle for them getting together to some extent. And I think, you know, they're probably not going to get as easily what they need out of a digital experience. Chris can disagree with me, I'm sure. But I think it's harder to work out how you get that, given that it's about the social element, how you work that into a digital experience for it to deliver the kind of equivalence of impact that they're looking for in the experience.
I just want to say on the segmentation front, I think that one of the things that's really kind of important to do and to understand about your existing audiences and the existing segmentation models is actually how you could kind of overlay on top of that a new kind of segmentation, which is specifically about how people feel about COVID.
Yeah.
And clearly the questions in here around, you know, what proportion of your audience falls into that 16% of people who were like, yeah, we just want to come back when you open, because they're going to be enthusiastic and you're going to know that they're going to return. And I think the more data we get on this, the more information we'll be able to have about, are those audiences, you know, more interested in particular art forms? Because then you go, okay, so actually, do we need to shift our programming in response to that? Because we know that if we want to get people to come back to our doors and we're putting on stuff that actually that audience is more likely to wait and be reluctant, then you're going to be struggling. Whereas if you can shift your programming to respond to those people who are saying, yay, we want to come back, knocking down the doors, then you've got a better shot of kind of filling your auditorium as much as possible.
Great, we get loads of contemporary work then. Loads of contemporary work in venues.
But also not just filling your auditorium, but of course, yes, I was going to say, Chris, I was going to say your digital audiences as well. So please do jump in.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that we're finding is that because if you've got something that might be considered new to a particular segment, it might be a little bit easier to cross-sell that over to them, because there is so much of the risk that is being taken out of that, and experience is being defanged by not having to travel there, get up off your sofa to be able to catch up later, and the price might have come down as well. So what it might do is that some of the events that a particular segment might be interested in doing might just expand out slightly. We're finding with some of the digital marketing campaigns that we're running at the moment, it's so much easier to sell people a link to a live stream than it is a ticket to a venue, because it's got that little bit more of an impulse purchase aspect to it. You don't have to coordinate with so many people, so that could be interesting.
Yeah, and we know, and I'll bring this data back up on how much people will be willing to or expect to pay, which is a real kind of standout finding for me about the interactive workshops and the creative workshops, showing a really strong willingness for people to pay the same as live. We know that there are a number of people on this webinar who are not venue based, who are in a position, perhaps more than any other, to take advantage of digital distribution, and there's some really interesting results there. So you will find the link to the report in the chat. Do go and download it. I'll just finish with this question here. Is there evidence of survey fatigue? Obviously, the November figures seem to suggest not. But is there evidence of survey fatigue, and should organisations consider signing up to this if they haven't already done so? Who would like to take that one?
Well, David, tell us what you think about survey fatigue first.
Yes, well, I think that as pointed out, as the 7,500 responses from November that we're yet to analyse. So I think audiences are very happy to keep on telling us how they're feeling. So I don't think we're seeing any signs of survey fatigue just yet.
And I think especially given, you know, the awful news today for a lot of regions, I think audiences, from what I've seen in the comments, they are desperate to help. So I think a lot of it is about how you communicate with them to say, you know, we really need your help with this information. You know, we don't have this data, and you can really help us to make sure that we get this right for audiences. So I think a lot of it is in the covering email or the way that it's couched. But where we've seen organisations do that really well, audiences have responded, and they seem very happy to keep being asked. I think in the case of the tracker, I think it's probably a good idea, and a lot of organisations who are using it have been saying this, that when they've emailed people, they've said, look, we would like to be able to send you this every month, or a bunch of questions every month. If you'd rather we didn't do that, let us know. But please, when you get it, please continue to fill it in regularly, because that's the only way we can engage with you at the moment. So yes, please do sign up. So shall I just say a few thank yous, Robin? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
So I just want to say a huge thank you to all the organisations who've been involved so far, who've trusted us with their audiences and their data to make this happen. I'd like to thank Arts Council England, who are supporting the Culture Restart programme, and also Arts Council Wales, who gave us some money to fund some tech so that we could do Welsh translations simultaneously, which has been great. And finally, if I'd just like to thank my fellow presenters today from Baker Richards and One Further, and of course you all for joining us. So thank you